Jennifer is going to talk with us today about Flowing Forward Minnesota TU's recent progress in the improvement and enhancement of riparian corridors and cold water streams in Minnesota's Driftless area. So another state chiming in. I see your presentation, Jenny.
Oh, okay. You see my slide?
Yep, and I hear you, so you may take it
Awesome.
away.
It looks like it's a little cut off on my end, but hopefully you can see most of it. Yeah, great. So I'm going to be talking about the stuff that Minnesota Trout Unlimited has been doing in stream habitat enhancement and restoration in southeastern Minnesota. So we'll just kind of get started. I know we're running a little late. Apologies to any of you that logged on to see Tustin Hoffman, but he'll be presenting tomorrow at 11:10. Let's see. So who am I? So I'm the Habitat Program Director for Minnesota TU. I'm very recent on the scene. I've been working with MNTU since last May. And primarily my job with MNTU is to work on stream habitat restoration and enhancement projects throughout Minnesota with the grants that we get from the Lessard Sands Outdoor Heritage Fund. I know that a lot of you are very familiar with Trout Unlimited and probably Minnesota Trout Unlimited, but when we look at our Minnesota Council, our mission is to conserve, protect, restore, and sustain Minnesota's cold water fisheries and their watersheds. And so we do that through habitat restoration work, through education and advocacy. My role with MNTU is really primarily in the habitat restoration piece of it. I'm not super involved with the education and advocacy. But yeah, so the Minnesota Council was established in 1959. There are thousands of members across 5 of our chapters, and we've been restoring habitat pretty actively since 2009. Part of the reason for that 2009 becoming sort of that date where we were able to kind of get active is because it was when the Clean Water Land and Legacy Amendment was passed. Well, it was passed in 2008, but the money became available in 2009. And so that has funded a lot of our work since then. And so most of our work is done in partnership with the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources, along with other partners as well. I love Minnesota for a lot of reasons, but you know, a lot of you are familiar with sort of the history of land use in southeastern Minnesota. You know, if you look back at the 1800s when agriculture was kind of exploding across the region, that had a pretty detrimental effect on our streams. Beginning in the 1930s, we started to turn things around with how we approach agriculture and manage our landscape, and then also with how we manage and how we manage our streams with public agencies and all of that good stuff. So we can't go super into that history today, but just to kind of highlight that, yeah, this is a success story. If you look at recent trends and trout populations across southeastern Minnesota, they've been growing, which is a really good thing. And a lot of that has to do with, earlier with stocking programs and with improved habitat, in-stream habitat, of course. This middle figure is definitely dated, but according to a report out of the Minnesota DNR from 2002, at least at that time, there were over 500,000 angler days per year. Again, that's probably much higher. And then also, it's no secret that the economic contributions to local economies in Minnesota and across the Driftless, where the economic fabric is probably otherwise largely agricultural. Fishing is a really important thing economically to support these economies, and so it's grown from an estimated 1.1 billion and I think it was like the early 2000s to 1.6 billion in 2016. And I wouldn't be surprised if that number is higher today. And a lot of that is in Minnesota. So when we look at our our program objectives for Minnesota Trout Unlimited, when we are getting funding to do these projects, there's sort of 5 big things that we're looking at that I'll talk about in more detail on subsequent slides. But restoring access to the floodplain is really central in a lot of the projects that we do. Designing reaches to accommodate flood flows, very important. Accounting for sediment loads within the system. Addressing a variety of habitats, including non-game wildlife and a native riparian buffer when it comes to vegetation. And then providing in-stream habitat for all age classes. Again, not not just focusing on those trophy sized fish. That's really not what we're trying to do. We're trying to accommodate the habitat that's necessary to support all age classes for a healthy demographic. So reconnecting floodplains and stabilizing banks are extremely important. So here is some before and after pictures can really kind of show you. This is a Rush Creek near Lewiston, Minnesota. This is before a project was done. If I were in a classroom or if I had you in an audience, I'd ask you what do you see wrong with this picture? What are some of the challenges that this stream system is facing? And you probably notice that there's actively eroding steep banks. There's some legacy soils there that you can see. There are trees falling in, which isn't always a bad thing, but can cause some problems. Now, when we look at how can we sort of repair this with a stream project, well, one thing that we want to do is to reconnect that floodplain. So when we look at when we think about flooding, for example, which our streams are susceptible to, floods unleash a huge amount of energy into stream channels, and the habitat that's provided by the stream banks and those in-stream habitat features can be damaged or destroyed unless that flood energy has somewhere to go. It has to be released outside that stream channel, and a healthy stream is able to do this by really quickly dissipating most of that flood energy outside the stream channel onto that floodplain. Now, as our streams have become degraded over time, over many decades, those stream beds become trapped between these very unnaturally tall and very sheer, highly erodible banks, with those legacy soils. And that's going to prevent the rising waters from being able to access that floodplain. And so that energy that gets trapped is going to kind of blow out in-stream habitat. It's going to drive down that the bottom of that stream, and so that's something that we're really trying to address. And so we're doing more better steep I guess better grading, and then also trying to put in those floodplain benches. And here on this slide, I'll talk more about this in a second, but we're also trying to incorporate kind of outside of the immediate floodplain some habitat features for non-game wildlife. And so this is an example of a stream some excess soil from the project was stockpiled in order to recreate some of the rough-winged swallow habitat that was eliminated when we actually went in and fixed those banks. So here's another example of a before picture from a project. This is on Winnebago Creek. So we've got an overly wide channel, and so we've got some aggradation into the middle, creating this little island. For scale, you can kind of see the survey crew out there. We've got 7-foot high banks. This is just simply too wide. And then here's the after, again, trying to establish reconnection to that floodplain. Now, this is a creek that's in a pasture. So this is before the vegetation is well established, but I'll talk a little bit more about vegetation in a few minutes. One thing that we're lacking in Minnesota TU is some really good pictures of the after, going back to the streams after 2-3 years of vegetation establishment. So we get something that looks a little bit better than this as an after, but this should give you an idea of at least what the channel looked like with the floodplain. Just another picture of this. This is a 70-foot wide blown out channel, again, running through a pasture in Winnebago Creek down in the far southeastern corner of Minnesota, southeastern Minnesota. You can see, again, adding, narrowing that channel, is super important for allowing the passage of sediment so we don't get that aggradation. Putting in benching for access to the floodplain and all that good stuff. Sand can be in ecological desert underwater in many cases. Overly wide channels we know cannot move sediment, so we get sand and silt falling out. This is Hay Creek up in kind of near Cannon Falls and Red Wing area. And so one thing that we want to do is to make sure that we, in our design, that we create the proper width of the stream that we can kind of pass those sediments through and expose coarse substrate, which is especially important for spawning fish. Here's another example of sort of a before and after with channel narrowing. So this is what they affectionately like to call Lake South Branch South Branch of the Whitewater River. And you can kind of see this old monitoring station for scale. Again, so this was flat, wide, and shallow. So we need to narrow the channel, speed up that stream velocity. Narrowing the channel along with adding riffles is important for increasing those baseline velocities. So we want to expose the coarse substrates so that they can be recolonized by macroinvertebrates and benthic organisms. So this is important here. Let's see. Oh, just another picture of Winnebago Creek, some before and afters for reconnecting the floodplain. So you can kind of see here how that channel was widened. But then we also added, again, some stockpile soil outside of the immediate floodplain for bank nesting birds, and then also some wetlands for reptiles and amphibians. So increasingly over time, we are really trying to make sure that within the corridor that we have to work with, which in most cases in a Minnesota DNR easement is 132 feet from the center of the channel. That's often all we really have to work with, but within that, we want to make sure that we're addressing habitat for all types of species and trying to look at this as an ecological system and not just looking at it as an in-stream project. So improving habitat diversity within the stream, of course, so adding riffles, which are important for spawning fish, benthic and macroinvertebrate communities, providing grade control on the projects. Large rock clusters are great habitat for larger fish. They can also kind of help us, kind of steer the current a little bit. Adding wood along the bank of the stream is important. So root wads, I know anglers don't always love them, but it does provide good habitat for fish as well and bank stability. Here is just some pictures again of different elements that we'll put in. So we've got that picture on the left, big pool logs. So when we're removing trees, as we're doing grading, these young, we've got trees that grow up on these legacy sediments, and we have to remove them in order to grade the channels, but we try to use as much of that wood and incorporate that wood into the design as we can. And so we've got pool logs, rock overhangs. A lot of our members, some of them I see are here today in our chapters, will help assist with building lunkers and trying to help with other habitat features as well. Non-game habitat, so wetland scrapes, which we've seen a few examples of those to support all the non-game species. So again, when we're looking at like adding wetlands for reptiles, amphibians, birds, looking at trees, trying to keep good hardwoods for bats and birds. When we're looking at native riparian vegetations, looking at plant communities that can support high diversity of terrestrial insects, as well as shorelines. This is an example of one of those soil stockpiles. It's kind of a grainy picture, but Dusty Hoffman with Minnesota DNR and I were out looking at streams last summer, and this is a relatively new feature that we've been adding to designs. EOR, one of our design consultants or firms that has been working on our projects, has been doing these for the last couple of years, but we're excited to see that they're actually working. We saw four of the holes were being were active with swallows, which was nice to see that if you build it, they will come. Wetland scrapes, again, this is on a Project Trout Brook where they added turtle basking logs and sand for nesting. So this is a pretty fresh project that was completed last August. Non-game habitat improvement. So again, one of the things that we're focusing on is establishing native plant communities. One thing you'll hear me say later, but I'll say it now, is we only plant grasses in pastures. Any other situation, we're planting native plant communities, native riparian plant communities that will support invertebrates and birds and all that good stuff, and trying to preserve native trees, enhancing macro invertebrate habitat in the stream. So in my old life, I used to do a lot of work with aquatic macroinvertebrates. So it's really fun to see that recolonization following a project and just how quickly that happens, and how those insects can really thrive in the habitats that we're restoring and enhancing. So again, I think one thing that's worth really emphasizing is that the vegetation management within the riparian corridor is really kind of evolving in the last few years in the work that we're doing. So our goal is to remove invasives and to restore native riparian vegetation. And again, we only plant grasses in pastures, and even then we're trying to use native mixes. But in any sort of non-pasture situation, we are definitely trying to improve the native riparian vegetation and get it established as quickly as we can. But also we're realizing that that takes time to do. It doesn't happen in a year. It doesn't happen in 2 years. We need 3 or more years in order to make that happen. And one reason, of course, this is preaching to the choir here, but the root systems within those native plant communities are, they go a long ways in terms of securing the soil and that landscape adjacent to that dynamic stream. And so we're realizing that if we can get these communities planted quickly, it really goes a long way in improving the resiliency of these newly restored streams in the case of heavy water flooding events. So I guess one thing I really want to kind of emphasize is, again, that like all of stream restoration work it's an evolving science, and we're all trying to get better at it and do better. And I feel like we're really lucky with Minnesota TU is that we've got awesome engineers and consultants that we work with that understand this and are wanting to improve. And also with the Minnesota DNR, it's really good work that's happening. And as our designs are evolving, I just wanted to kind of emphasize the things that we're learning and we're trying to do better at. As a really, probably one of the biggest things is the vegetation maintenance. As we're realizing it takes more than a year or two to get vegetation established within these corridors. And so in our funding now, we're working in 3 years of vegetation maintenance, but if it takes longer than that, we'll find the funding to go back. Treating invasives can be time consuming and onerous, and oftentimes we need to go back and reseed. So we're really trying to do better at that vegetation maintenance. More grading, so we're trying to grade at a 4-to-1 slope whenever possible to, again, restore access to that floodplain is super important. Also through more and wider bankful benches, we found, oopsies, going too soon. We're finding that that's super important as well. Placing the root wads lower. So for a while, the root wads, we were placed a little too high, exposed to the air, and that just diminishes their longevity. And so making sure that they're below the water surface as much as possible. Extending tow wood from the base of the ripple down to the glides. So again, trying to incorporate wood as much as possible into bank stabilization. Focusing on the non-game habitat features, and then also looking at the importance of things like riffles in providing grade control. So this is the stuff we're really focused on when we're designing these habitat enhancement projects. So I'm kind of losing track of time. I'm going to try to speed through the rest of this pretty quickly. Last year, during the last working season, in Minnesota, we did a few projects. So we had projects at Hay Creek, up again, kind of outside Red Wing. I'm not going to talk about that one today. We also had Trout Brook, which is up near Meesville. I'm not going to talk about that one today. I'm just going to focus on Cedar Valley, which is kind of more down into the real deep driftless area. So I'll talk about Cedar Valley. These are some pre-project photos. That's Dustin Hoffman with our Southern Stream Specialist with the Minnesota DNR. So we went out and did some estimation of stream bank erosion before the project happened, and you can kind of appreciate some of these these steep banks and actively eroding banks and all that legacy soil sitting there. So just some pre-project photos. So you can see what we were working with. Slumping banks, again, a lot of active erosion here. This is during the project, so you can see the grading that's happening, some newly installed riffles. So again, just some pictures of during the project. So we determined that, so with the EPA's PLET tool, there's different ways you can measure soil erosion, but using that measure or that tool, we estimated that just under 10 dump truck loads of sediment per year will be prevented from entering the system because of the grading and reconnection of the floodplain on this project. So this project in length was just under 5,000 feet. So it was a fairly long project. Here's some before and afters. The before is on the right in this one. I don't know why they're flipped, but then the after is on the left. We can see the grading and narrowing of the channel. And then here's some after again. So I think these pictures were taken in September. So you can see there's an angler there who got there right away. This is a cover crop that you see. So that cover crop this year will hopefully give way to some nice natives that'll come through. Kind of see how it looks afterwards. It was kind of nice. So one thing that our funding does not support because of the rules, I guess, is a lot of post-habitat improvement work monitoring. And so the scientist in me has a hard time with that, because I'd love to be able to go in and quantify things before and after, like, in terms of fish production and macroinvertebrate production, but we can't. But it was nice one day to go down and see that there was a group from the Save Our Streams and Isaac Walton League. We're down there at the very end of the project doing some doing some macroinvertebrate sampling to look at, kind of how the community had popped back. So they knew there had been a project done, and they were really excited. They said this was the best stream, or this is the best haul they had all season or all year with, in terms of the numbers and diversity of macroinvertebrates that they found. Again, it kind of speaks to the recolonization, and that happens pretty quickly after projects are done. So that was pretty cool to see. Also, Dr. Neil Mundahl from Winona State, he's done some work on Cedar Valley in the past, and he knew we were going in to do a project. So he had some students that went in and did some pre-project monitoring, some pre-project sampling of trout in the reach where we were going to be doing the project. And then they went in after we were done with the project in September and did some more electrofishing. And it was nice. They found that the in-stream habitat features, especially those root wads, were being dominated by adults, and that the young fish, the younger demographics, were being, or younger year classes were associated with that new nursery habitat that was created during the project. Overall, they saw an increased abundance of fish after the project. So that was really cool to see that. And, I don't know if this will work, but we'll see. Oh, and here's some footage just taken a couple days ago of just fish stacked up by those root wads. My kid threw in a stick, of course. But yeah, a lot of fish. So projects in the pipeline, I think this is my last slide. The projects in the pipeline that we have for this upcoming year, we've got 4 projects we hope will happen. For sure, Mill Creek and Rice Creek are going to be installed starting in April, May, probably into June. We're hoping Maple Creek in Houston County will happen a little bit later in the summer. pending some permitting stuff that's happening, and then also a project on Gilbert Creek outside of Lake City. Again, kind of pending some permitting stuff, but we're hoping that'll happen as well, be installed this year. And then actually these three should not, I should have fixed this. So Eagle Creek, Spring Creek, and South Branch of the Root River. So these we're hoping to be installed in 2025. Again, Gilbert's kind of on the fence. We're hoping for 2024, but it might be 2025. These two are going to be are in the design phase right now. We're bidding those out, and we're have these in the pipeline for 2025 for installation. So that's kind of what we have going. And with that, I have no idea how long I went. So if there's time for questions, I'm happy to take them. Otherwise, I can take them in the Q&A.
Really appreciate your presentation, Jenny, and there's definitely been a lot of projects moving forward in Minnesota.